Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing today? It is an honor to welcome you all on behalf of the People's Forum. We're a space dedicated to political education, to the culture of the people, and most importantly, to organizing. So it is important for us to be able to host important convenings like this where Code Pink is daring us to draw the line. It's the most important topic of debate, I think, in our period. We are all, from our different organizations, deeply involved in aspects of organizing against the world's greatest threat, which is US imperialism, personified in the Pentagon, in the aptly called Department of War. Whether we're facing that threat in Latin America, Africa, or Asia, or in the streets of this country, the threat is one and all the same. And that requires us to come together, to organize together, and we are happy to lend our space to doing that. As we speak, Code Pink, the People's Forum, and many of the organizations in this room are under fierce attack by this administration, who would prefer for us to be quiet, who would prefer for us to be silenced, who would prefer for us not to ever disrupt them or embarrass them, as Code Pink loves to do. But our task is to continue to organize, to continue to educate, and to effectively draw that line through serious campaigns that not just mobilize millions of people in this country, but actively stop the war machine. So with that, we welcome you. Consider this your home. Consider this your space. And because it is your home and it is your space, we also want to talk to you about the fact that as we're under threat, as they want to shut us down, we're actively trying to build a new home for the movements. We want the People's Forum to be a permanent space for the type of work that all of you do. So if you haven't donated already, we hope you donate before you leave today and that you get your organizations to talk about this, because organizing needs spaces. We all know what happens when you have to organize and you don't even have a place to have your meeting. You don't have a place to build your placards. You don't have a place to do the most basic interactions, which is convince other people to join the cause. So with all of that said, welcome again to the People's Forum. It's an honor to have the Code Pink crew here. They're not they're not just anyone in this space. They're family. They're close comrades and partners in this revolutionary hope that we have, which is to transform the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Manolo. And I just want to say, we're here together to learn and to be inspired and be activated. And this space for the last 7 years has been so essential to so much of the building of the movement that it's really exciting for us yet again to have a summit on the cost of war here, because there's new voices. And what's also to remember is every day the movement is growing. Every day our roots are getting stronger into the truth. Our capacity to share, to teach, and then inspire and be in the streets and engage together, it grows. And this is one of the places that I really want to witness that. So I want to say welcome to the summit, because this has happened here over the last 7 years a few times. And the coalition is growing. The different organizations that you're going to hear from today, all the peace movement has integrated it into our work. And you'll hear how that happens, that we're teaching from the place where we lead, that we're creating campaigns from the place where we are, and that everyone is welcome to join them across the platforms. Because, right, the only way we change anything is the people. We are the power, and we need to constantly be learning and growing and connecting and having the movement build. So that's what's exciting about today. I just want to talk a little bit about the history of this campaign. This is really the beginning of Code Pink. We said war is not green, because we saw before, when we were in Iraq, even before the US started bombing Iraq for the second time, the devastation of the first time. We saw the deformed bursts from the weapons that were used. We saw the destruction of, in Iraq, the cradle of civilization had been just destroyed, where agriculture was destroyed and couldn't happen. We were watching that, but also a war for oil, right? That the destruction of the planet was at the essence of why this war was happening. I don't want to make it that simple. It had many layers of why it was happening, but that was the public layer. So another thing that happened is when we were marching to try to stop the war in Iraq, I was noticing, because I'm part of the Rainforest Action Network, and on the board for 40 years, we were noticing the climate movement wasn't really showing up to our anti-war marches. Yet we're all about the same thing, because war destroys the planet. So come on over, this is where you want to be. And some people did, but the climate movement's huge. It's hundreds of millions of people, and just the 12 we're focusing on our campaign, it's over $4 billion that they get funded a year. Just, funding for peace doesn't even show up as a blip. And so when I really saw it was when my friend Paul Hawken wrote a book, Drawdown, and it was 100 ways you could draw down carbon. And I said, where's war? And he said, well, there's no study on it. So the Cost of War at Brown University did the study, and Netta Crawford was blown away, and it's become her life's work, at how no one had done this. No one had said it. There was no study. And how do things happen? By study, things you can rely on. There is now a study, and we took it to COP. And one of the things that happened at COP in Glasgow is I would hand out the War is Not Green stickers and say, did you know war was the greatest contributor to climate change? Here we are, 100,000 activists in the street, not one knew. Not an accident. On purpose, it's been buried. So you're here today to learn more, to be able to share more, because the planet is how we live. This is our life. It's the air and the soil and how we eat. And yet, everything that war does is destructive to the planet and therefore destructive to life. So I'm very excited that we have our amazing guests. We have Katie Halper, we have Steven Donziger here to teach and inspire you, and then we'll come up with ways to be engaged and activate. But first, I want to bring up our amazing campaign coordinator for War is Not Green, Aaron Kirschenbaum, who's an awesome organizer, not just for the planet, not just for peace, for Palestine, and to engage his generation. So Aaron, thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? All good? Great. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm really excited for this. And I think I'm really excited about this in part because I think that every aspect of making this happen, every part of what we've bumped up against, and every part of what we're going to be sifting through and moving through represents exactly what we're trying to rectify and fight for. And so I'm just going to go over a little bit about why we're having this event and what we hope to get out of it, and some of our recent work that we're working on. And so, as you know, this event is titled Drawing the Line at the Pentagon for the Planet. And this coincides with the start tomorrow of the International Draw the Line Days of Action, which are days about restating and taking over the demands for the future of the people and the planet. And so if we're drawing a line, and if we're refusing for our focuses and our efforts and our targets to be swept under the rug, we need to be really clear at what the biggest dangers to our existence and our liberation are. And we can't afford to be siloed into different so-called movements. You know, every struggle has different segments of society that will mobilize, and different sub-movements, whether it's students, whether it's workers, unions, farmers, agricultural sectors. But around the world, when US-led or backed warfare and militarism comes into the picture, it is crystal clear that this is a threat to everyone. And so, you know, I always point to the success of the movement to get the US Navy out of Vieques, which is an island off the coast of Puerto Rico that is still illegally occupied by the US, but for over 50 years, there was a US naval base that would test bombs there. And you know, in 2003, Residents were over 20% more likely to have cancer than the mainland. But this was a movement that for over 50 years, there was a US naval base dropping bombs on the soil. Many of those bombs would later go on to be dropped on Palestine. But the US Navy was evicted, and that didn't come out of nowhere. It came out after a multi-sector movement that mobilized independence organizers, religious groups, fishers, agricultural workers, and they recognized this common struggle for sovereignty, for health, for land, and for life. And that was a struggle that we need to emulate, and that was a big part of what Jody was saying. That so often we are sort of siloed into very separate struggles, but I think VIEC is also, it exhibits exactly what both we're fighting against and what we're fighting for. We are fighting for that struggle, and it was clear, given what the toxicity of these chemicals that were burned into the crust of the soil were. In 2017, lung cancer and bronchitis were more than 280% more likely than the mainland among women and 200% for men, and the US Navy still has not cleaned up that destruction. And so you can also trace this to everywhere where there is a US military presence. You know, in Hawaii, in Red Hill, when there was a leakage of jet fuel, more than 90,000 people's drinking water was contaminated. But again, it's these places where it is the most clear what the threat and toll of US militarism is that are exactly the places that have the strongest resistance to it. Because I'll talk about our campaign in a second, but so often organizing spaces are siloed, and this horrific cost of war, of imperialism, of militarism on the planet is what we refer to as the elephant in the room. And a lot of climate organizations won't touch it. And so we're presenting an ask to some of the largest climate organizations in the country. It's an invitation to join the movement and actually take the lead from their members in many cases and from folks already in the movement. I mentioned Hawaii and the Sierra Club chapter, which is one of the organizations that we're presenting an ask for, which has a budget of around $190 million a year. That organization in Hawaii, the Sierra Club chapter, has been part of a lot of the efforts to evict the ongoing military occupation of the nation. And so we know that the US military, the Pentagon, is the largest institutional polluter on the planet. It produces over 51 million metric tons a year. We know that the US military has over 800 bases around the planet that act as launching pads for warfare, and that each one of those carries stories of invasion, of breaches of sovereignty, and of environmental disaster like what's occurred in Hawaii and Puerto Rico, across the African continent, in Latin America, in Palestine, and everywhere that the US occupies on the planet. And we know that each one of those bases also has had jet fuel leakages and leakages of cancer-causing chemicals like PFAS. And we also know that resource extraction, whether it's so-called critical minerals that are being used for green technology, or whether it's fossil fuels that have created a 2-decade-long quote-unquote war on terror. Not only is resource extraction responsible for warfare, but resource extraction would not be able to survive in its current capacity without warfare. And so that's why we've convened this mini-summit. To be the most effective, we need to understand what levers we can force, especially for environmental movements, when almost every environmental measure, including ones that were really far from remotely satisfying, when all of those are being undone. From our end, we've launched an open letter that over 100 organizations, including many of the ones here, have signed on to. It's called Environmentalists Unite, War Fuels the Climate Crisis. And a few thousand individuals have also signed on to that, and the flyers that you have will also link to that petition and open letter. And then what that letter states is that, if that war fuels the climate crisis, it states a very bare minimum statement that has just been brushed under the rug. But now we're also asking, with our new campaign Elephant in the Room, some of the largest environmental organizations in the country that have not signed on to this letter, with annual budgets that, as Jody said, raise up to $4 billion a year. We're asking them to at least just acknowledge this and spotlight it. And it's not an attack, it's an invitation to see what we can really do with organizations that each have their own tactics, but can be united. As I said, we're starting with the Sierra Club. And I know that so many of you here are engaged in incredible, committed work, and I'm not asking you to completely overhaul anything. Everyone is needed and different approaches are needed. But what I'm asking is for us all to think about the different ways that organizing spaces that you might have not thought of originally as being part of your sphere, to think about how it could be, or how other organizations, other organizers, other so-called movements can help out and collaborate. I'm asking that everyone thinks a little bit more about what you learned today and the talking points that we can share when connecting with others in organizing. And I'm asking that we shine a light on all of this, because the less avoidable it can become everywhere, from board meetings, policy, grassroots organizing, mass mobilization, the more that we can do and the more strategic that we can be and the closer that we can get to winning. And so before we get to our incredible speakers that I'm super excited for, I just want to thank our endorsers. I'm just going to really quickly read them all out. But the People's Forum, 350.org, the Climate Justice Alliance, the Black Alliance for Peace, the Palestinian Youth Movement, the Youth Climate Finance Alliance, the National Priorities Project at the Institute for Policy Studies, the Palestinian Institute for Climate Strategy, Veterans for Peace and the Veterans for Peace Climate Crisis and Militarism Project, the Grassroots Global Justice Alliance, the Climate and Community Institute and their new project, the Transition Security Project, World Beyond War, Wage Peace, Disability People's Forum Uganda, the Veterans for Peace Chapter 92, Plowshare Peace and Justice Center, Sunrise Movement NYC, Nodatol for Korean Community Development, and the Diaspora Palante Collective. And I think that exactly exhibits what we're trying to do and where we're trying to grow and where we are super excited to have increased collaboration, strategizing, and organizing. And so thank you so much, and I'm really looking forward to this.
Thank you, Aaron. You see why we're so lucky at Code Pink to have Aaron leading this campaign. So next, I want to bring up one of my favorite people on the planet, who is a brilliant comedian, writer, filmmaker, podcaster, and political commentator, the host of the podcast, The Katie Halper Show, and co-host of the podcast, Useful Idiots with Aaron Mate. Katie is just a light of how we do this work. The connective tissue of like her capacity to tell story is amazing, but then she also raises up everyone else's stories. And that's how we create change, with our voices, with speaking from what we know. And Katie does that so well. Katie Halper is gonna host the speakers this afternoon. So Katie, come on up.
See, strong woman. So we're actually going to bring on some Heba, who is an advisor with the Palestinian Youth Climate Task Force. Sorry, I literally just got this. Palestinian Institute for Climate Strategy. See, this is a work in progress right here. Okay, Heba, thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Can you guys hear me fine? Okay, that's good. Yeah. I want to give a big thanks to Code Pink for organizing this event and to the sponsors and the panelists for their efforts around this issue. Today, I'm here representing the Palestinian Institute for Climate Strategy, also known as PICS, and I will share more about our work in a bit. But before I do, I want to begin by sharing who I am and the history that has shaped me and the work that I do. I stand before you today as living proof of history. My name is Hiba Qasim. I'm a Palestinian Muslim American and the proud daughter of Palestinian refugees. Though I was born and raised in Dearborn, Michigan, I have also lived the reality of a Palestinian refugee camp. My identity, my roots, and my lived experience are inseparable from the work I carry forward today. I share this because over 77 years ago, in 1948, the Nakba took place. More than 700,000 Palestinians, including my own family, were violently displaced from their homes and land. That history is not just the distant past. It is an ongoing reality that continues to shape generations of Palestinians, myself included. I say this because I am living proof that the colonization of my land, the occupation of my people, and the genocide that we are witnessing in Gaza today has been happening for nearly 8 decades. And for most of those decades, the majority of the world stood by in silence, watching as Palestinians endured harsh life under an apartheid state and in constant displacement. It took a publicly documented genocide, documented by the very people being genocided, for much of the world to finally wake up. And yet, even now, there are people, organizations, institutions, and governments that remain silent. They gaslight us, they dismiss us, they insist that it's complicated. Among those institutions are the big greens and traditional environmental groups here in the United States. These are the same institutions that dedicate their mission and resources to combating the climate crisis, yet refuse to acknowledge the connection between militarism, war, colonization, and climate. Some of us who do care about climate justice have taken matters into our own hands. Earlier this year, in April, I organized a delegation to Palestine for climate and environmental justice organizers and activists. Over 10 days, we traveled across the country to witness firsthand the ecological impact of colonization, occupation, and apartheid on Palestinian lives, and to understand the intersection of ethnic cleansing and the climate crisis. We visited Bethlehem, East Jerusalem, Hebron, including walking through the checkpoints armed with automated machine guns to reach the old city of Hebron, Jenin, Jericho, the Jordan Valley, Ramallah, and more. We met with Palestinian Bedouin communities, farm workers, community organizations, leaders, and families living in refugee camps, all under attack by settler violence and directly impacted by the apartheid state. In the 1948 territories, lands completely occupied, we learned how the Israeli occupation has planted non-indigenous species and created national parks to cover up depopulated Palestinian villages as part of a systemic ethnic cleansing machine. As a group, we witnessed and learned a lot. What became undeniable is this is an apartheid state. It is the weaponization of the environment. In the West Bank, ethnic cleansing is carried out through land seizure and displacement, cutting off access to land and water, theft of land, animals, and trees, and the intentional destruction, contamination, and poisoning of the land. And then there is Gaza, our beloved Gaza. For obvious reasons, we are unable to visit, yet its reality is undeniable. While every Palestinian is suffering, Gaza remains the epicenter of destruction and land grabs. Bombs and waste are systemically destroying and poisoning both the people and the land. This is an intentional effort to destroy cropland, induce starvation, deny access to water, and bombard all of Gaza relentlessly. Many of us are working tirelessly to stop the genocide, lift the siege on Gaza, end arms sales to Israel, and dismantle the apartheid state. Some of these efforts intersect directly with climate and environmental justice. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm here representing the Palestinian Institute for a Climate Strategy. PICS is a Palestinian-led organization and builds transformative responses to the climate crisis grounded in justice, liberation, and lived Palestinian realities. We are dedicated to advancing ecosumud, integrating ecological strategies to confront the challenges of ecocide, apartheid, and colonialism in Palestine. As part of our work, PICS, in partnership with Tipping Point North-South, released a manifesto on military conflict-related emissions and climate reparations for Palestine. This briefing estimates the carbon emission-based costs of the traceable military-related activities by Israel and its allies, including the US, and calculates the fraction of climate reparations owed to Palestine, amounting to upwards of $148 billion since the Nakba. Yet, let us be very clear, no dollar amount, no calculation, no reparations will ever do justice for the lives stolen, the land uprooted, and the generations of loss we have endured as Palestinians. It is no shock that the climate institutions are silent in the face of genocide. These are the very same institutions that claim to care about environmental justice, that lean on buzzwords, that open their meetings by naming the indigenous land they currently reside on, yet remain inactive when it comes to real and meaningful climate and environmental justice. They continue their internal racist and discriminatory practices, and they dismiss the very frontline communities most impacted by the policies and actions of this country. We cannot remain silent. The climate crisis, occupation, and the ongoing genocide are not separate issues. They are interconnected. To fight for true climate and environmental justice, we must confront the systems of oppression that devastate both people and the planet. We must demand accountability from institutions, governments, and organizations that claim to care but continue to ignore these realities. We must lift the siege on Gaza, end arms sales that fuel destruction, and dismantle the apartheid structures that perpetuate violence and ecological harm. And we must support Palestinian-led solutions, like the work of PICS, grounded in justice, liberation, and ecological resilience. Solutions that center frontline voices and knowledge of the communities most impacted. Our solidarity must be active, not performative. We must not accept silence, inaction, or excuses. We must act, we must speak, we must resist. Because the people of Palestine, the land, and the future of this planet depend on it. Thank you very much. Free Palestine.
I'm going to bring up the wonderful speakers in no particular order. So, oh yeah, okay. Okay, great. So I'm going to bring up the excellent speakers that we are very honored to have with us today. So let's start. I'm going to be bringing up Yusuf, who is and Yusuf leads outreach and partnerships for the Youth Climate Finance Alliance, YCFA, an eco-socialist and anti-imperialist organization that works to build youth and student power through base-building chapters and by providing distributed support in the form of funding, training, and coaching to cross-movement youth and students across the so-called US. Yusuf was raised and sharpened as an organizer in her beloved hometown of Cincinnati, Ohio, where she's still based. So welcome, Yusuf. Ibtihal Mali is an organizer with the Palestinian Youth Movement. So welcome, Ibtihal. Austin Cole was raised in Springfield, Ohio, and his people come from the Mississippi Delta and Birmingham, Alabama. He is an organizer, writer, and community development planning practitioner. His professional work focuses on environmental climate justice, transforming economic systems, and Black African liberation, with a current focus on food sovereignty and climate finance. He is a member of and currently serves as National Co-Coordinator for the Black Alliance for Peace and co-coordinates BAP's, Black Alliance for Peace's Haiti Americas team, which helped to launch the collective campaign for a zone of peace in our Americas in 2023. And finally, coming to the stage is Susan Schnall, an activist, veteran, public health professional, teacher, currently president of Veterans for Peace. She was court-martialed for anti-war activities during American War on Vietnam, worked in New York City's hospitals for 31 years, taught at New York University for 25 years, and has been an activist for over 60 years. So welcome. So let's see, I think we're just going to start off with, sorry? Oh, okay, great. So we're going to start off with Susan, who needs to leave. But just tell us about your organization and the connection between climate, war, and the organizing that you do.
Is this working? Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you. I feel like, as the elder, I'm sorry, I do need to leave because we do have another demonstration that's going on that some of you might have heard about, September 18th, the strike for Palestine and to stop the shipment of American war machine overseas. So I'm sorry, I apologize, I'll be leaving. And Veterans for Peace is a member organization, primarily veterans, but you all can join as associate members and make us even stronger. We feel that as a group of veterans who have been to war, seen what the damage does, that we have that voice that hopefully the American people and people will listen to when we say no more war, no more destruction. Did you want to go through the rest of the panel? And then I will take you back, I hope, for a couple minutes to Vietnam, when the ecocide and the identification of genocide against a people was my beginning of involvement in the peace movement.
No, you can continue now.
Oh. Thank you. There is a lot of literature on the table over there. I handed out to as many of you who I could reach our latest edition of Peace and Planet News that is an edition produced by members of Veterans for Peace. This issue is about climate and climate change and the impact of war. Let me just take you back for a couple minutes again to Vietnam, because my entrance into anti-war and peace organizing started there when I was a Navy nurse and saw the impact of war and became active in the anti-war movement, determined to stop the military going overseas to Southeast Asia. And we squarely put ourselves on the side of those people that this government was bombing and attempting to destroy. You may have heard that description from one of the generals. They were going to bomb Vietnam back into the Stone Age. They weren't successful in doing that. They were successful in spraying what we call Agent Orange dioxin over South and Central Vietnam. Some of this contained chemical deposits of dioxin that remain in the soil today. How many years later? It's 50 years later, and that soil remains contaminated and continues to impact on the people, causing severe birth defects. I didn't bring a slideshow to show you, but I know that this is a continuation of the American corporate war industry. Agent Orange, who is Agent Orange owned by? It's Monsanto. Monsanto has moved to Germany. Who have they collaborated with now? It is Bayer. What did Bayer produce during the Second World War? The gases for the chambers. So we have this history of what I would call probably the most evil on earth. And they continue to produce the war that continues all over the world. I just saw an article today about how devastating the war is on Sudan, that it's one of the worst crises in the world. But let me get back to Veterans for Peace. Our organization has been around for 40 years. We have multiple projects. We have projects that are solely focusing on stopping the genocide in Gaza with our mobilization group. Today, I brought you information about our climate and the relationship. We call it the impact of the military on the devastation on climate. And we focus on the military's damage to climate. We talk about vast and largely unreported greenhouse gas emissions. We talk about the military as protection for oil corporations. We talk about the military, how it's squandering trillions of needed dollars for addressing climate and people's needs, to take care of people, health, education, welfare in this country, of using all of that money to be able to care for people and for peaceful activities. And we also talk about the military and its constant promotion of war, a human, climate, and environmental disaster. I think about Times Square and the military recruiting station, which, by the way, many years ago, I was arrested at because we had a demonstration about the bombing of the dikes in northern Vietnam. You may remember that, it was 1972, and at that time we knew that if those dikes were bombed and the water was let go, there would be another genocide on the people of Vietnam. So this country has a long history, and it's a long history that needs to stop and to gear itself for peace. Let me tell you about Veterans for Peace and the project that we're doing now on the climate to alert people. It's called No Military Air Shows. And we show up where there are the squadrons of the Blue Angels flying and hope to educate people that this is contamination of the climate, that all of these military emissions just continue to poison the climate. We're working with a number of organizations, hand out literature, and talk with the community surrounding those air shows. There's literature on the table over in the center of the room that has an identification of where the air shows are going and how Veterans for Peace members are showing up to protest. I did a lot of research, again, for today's meeting, but you all know this information far better than I do about the tonnage of American bombs that has been dropped. I'll say again, the use of white phosphorus was used extensively in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, and continues to be used today on the people and the land of Palestine. And it needs to stop. There is an impact on the people, on the land, on the soil, and for generations. And what I'd like to mention today is the continuing impact on generations, on the climate. I know that you'll hear from other people about how much war material is being used. But when I say I started talking about Agent Orange and trying to, it's 20 years now, and doing studies and saying, okay, we have these studies, the impact on the people and the land. There's land in Vietnam that can no longer be used for agriculture. It can't be used, not just because of the poisons in the air, but because of the poisons on the land, because of the unexploded ordnance that we don't even think about when we talk about the crisis today in Gaza. But the people who live there will be dealing with this issue for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. They will not be able to till the soil and to be able to have farmers do the work again. There's poisoning of the fishery. So there is a deliberate attempt to starve the population. I look at the explosions going on and I think, no, this is more. This is starving the population for generations to come because the land will not be usable. Where will the people go? We know if we take a look at the impact of white phosphorus or the bombs or, and I think, right, the drones that try to take away the human element of what's happening and think we obviously have a pattern in this country that really needs to stop. We give money to the millionaires, we give money to the corporations, we give power to them. We know who is in power in Washington today. We know there's an administration, we know there's an extraordinary amount of power and money behind them. We need to join forces so that we also can have a voice in what this country does in our name, and so we can stop that carnage. And I would just like again to mention to you the project at Veterans for Peace that I came here to talk about was the impact on the climate of the war. But there's so much more than that. And Veterans for Peace has a number of projects. We have a boat that goes around the world talking about anti-nuclear and the power and trying to stop the power of the nuclear war. And we talk about what the impact is on the people where the atomic tests were conducted. And that takes us back to the 1950s and 1960s. So for many years, we need to understand and know our history so that we can become smarter and we can figure out how we can deal with this and how we can come up against this extraordinary power. Another quick project that we have is going into the factories where the armaments are being built and handing information to the workers and to the supervisors of what they are building and what this material will be used for, and that it is in fact illegal in the eyes of the world. It's illegal because it violates the Genocide Convention, because it violates our own national laws. Our laws say the president does not have the authority to send over the tonnage of armaments that he currently does to Israel. It is illegal. I don't know whether it would help if the Senate and the House approved it, but that says to us it's another way of organizing and something else that we can do. So we need to get in touch with each other, certainly with the major climate organizations, and say, ceasefire now, stop the carnage now, stop it now, it's being done in our name, and we refuse to have it continue. And I'll say again what we said in the 60s, it's just power to the people. We have that responsibility. We need to work together and to say, okay, ceasefire now and stop the genocide in Gaza. Thank you.
One thing I was struck by when you were speaking and mentioned the bombing Vietnam back into the Stone Age, and it's incredible because it's not one Israeli lawmaker, but two of them have promised to do that. So you have Benny Gantz bragging in a campaign ad, and this is the opposition to Netanyahu. This is the good Israeli alternative, apparently. He bragged in a campaign ad that he had sent Gaza back into the Stone Age. And you also have Yoav Gallant, who said recently he threatened to bomb Lebanon back into the Stone Age. So really making it easy for us to see these disgusting connections and how we're not learning the history lessons that we need to be, or perhaps some of us are, but the people in power aren't. So speaking of that connection, do you want to talk about what you guys do at PYM?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm part of the Palestinian Youth Movement. We're a transnational youth org, basically fighting for the liberation of our land and freedom. And I'll be speaking briefly today about PYM's Mask Off Maersk campaign as part of a broader effort towards a people's arms embargo. How many people have heard of this campaign? Just curious. Awesome. That's awesome. So this campaign actually emerged to answer this question of how do we stop the war machine from where we live. Maersk is a Danish shipping and logistics company that has facilitated the shipping of weapons and weapons components to the Zionist entity that's making the genocide of the Palestinian people possible. So this translates into tanks, fighter jets, and military vehicles that are made in the United States and then sent to Israel to execute the genocide. And because we understand that shipping a weapons component, a bullet casing that becomes a bullet, is in essence shipping a weapon. So this is part of the goal of this campaign, is to show then how logistics companies are the key to this expanding arms trade. And in the context of this event today, understanding the supply chain allows us to understand the role that logistics and shipping giants play in genocide. So Maersk doesn't manufacture weapons, but it facilitates their flow. And in the same capacity, its active participation in war and genocide make it an active culprit and aggressor in this current climate catastrophe that we are in. Logistics companies and the facilitation of war go hand in hand. The latter cannot exist without the former. And American weapons companies sit squarely at the top of the global arms industry. And just in 2022 alone, the top 5 US weapons contractors made $196 billion in military-related revenue. So these things are definitely connected. And I actually wanted to highlight very specifically a recent report that the Palestinian Youth Movement put out at the end of May that detailed Maersk's central role in manufacturing and maintaining F-35 fighter jets for Israel. And I think that understanding this global F-35 program actually reveals a lot to us about the global economy of war and the way that these systems work in harmony towards, frankly, a shared destructive goal. So to explain really briefly, the F-35 jet fighter has been an integral component in executing Israel's genocidal war on Gaza. This fighter jet is capable of carrying a large variety of weapons, such as all variants of the Mk-80 series bomb, which make up the class majority of the bombs that have been dropped on Gaza. This program is multinational, and it's the US Department of Defense's largest acquisitions program. The production of this fighter jet is sustained by more than 1,400 suppliers in the United States and more than 100 countries across the globe. And important to note that the global supply chain contributes to 70% of the total cost of the F-35 jet fighter, which further underscores the vast logistics operations that must be built to sustain this program. So our researchers found that Maersk has shipped the wings for every Israeli F-35 delivered since at least March of 2022, including those for 5 more Israeli F-35s scheduled for delivery by 2028. Maersk's involvement in shipping Israeli F-35s dates back as early as 2018. Moreover, nearly all maritime shipments of F-35 components to Lockheed Martin Aeronautics, which is based in Fort Worth, Texas, and Northrop Grumman, which is based in Palmdale, California, and they're two of the most critical production hubs for the fighter jet program, have been transported by Maersk. Shipments to these fighter jet production hubs have connected suppliers across the United States, Israel, Italy, the Netherlands, Norway, Turkey, Canada, France, and the United Kingdom, sometimes in violation of these countries' own export laws, if people are familiar with everything that happened in Spain. Additionally, Maersk facilitates shipments for Israel Aerospace Industries and Leonardo, which are 2 key defense contractors that are manufacturing F-35 wings and electronic warfare systems. Briefly, between 2019 and 2024, Maersk shipped at least 310 sets of F-35 wings, which are enough to equip 49.5% of the 611 aircraft delivered globally in that period. And of those aircraft delivered, 18 were F-35 variants delivered to Israel during that same period. This report that we put out also presents extensive evidence of Maersk's deep involvement in the production and assembly of military goods, facilitating shipments that ensure Israel's war machine remains fully operational. So essentially, the research presented here implicates Maersk at every stage of the supply chain, from manufacturing components to assembling weapons to delivering them for use in Israeli military aggression. And it also allows us to understand how Maersk has situated itself as an industry lead when it comes to the arteries of imperialism with regards to maintaining this overall supply chain. So the findings of this report and the general revelation of Maersk's complicity in this F-35 program led to some pretty significant action across the globe. And for the sake of time, I won't get into it, but you can read about it on our website, maskoffmaersk.com/reports, or you can come chat with me after. But on the high level, literally pushing states like Spain to actually enforce and call for an arms embargo. But the point that I want to drive home is that what understanding this broader F-35 global supply chain and logistics research has allowed us to do is demystify the world around us to better understand how financialized capitalism and imperialism operate today. So by understanding that the Zionist entity has very strategically placed itself as the center of the function of imperial warfare and as the center for counterinsurgency programs in the Arab world, it then allows us to better understand that our role then must become exposing the level of complicity that these corporations and our governments have in this genocide. And this is kind of the core of the campaign, to say that the supply chain is actually not as complex as these corporations want you to believe, that rather they demonstrate the very clear relationship between capital and warfare, and this relationship that's at a crossroads with the very existence of our planet and its people. And so for us, this is where we then push for a people's arms embargo and demonstrate that there is movement that can be done with organized labor and popular movements in the disruption of the supply chain as a response to this moment. So if we understand that the global economy of war is one that is fundamentally at a crossroads with the planet, one that is directly destroying the climate, we come to see Maersk's role in the supply chain and the overall supply chain and logistics companies as critical nodes in the climate catastrophe. And so I just wanted to end that, coming off of the heels of the People's Conference for Palestine that happened like 2 weeks ago, I think it's important to note that what a campaign like the Mask Off Maersk campaign is doing is effectively raising the political ceiling by challenging corporate complicity along the supply chain that is sustaining Israel's genocide of the Palestinian people and that is culminating in some direct, tangible wins towards a people's arms embargo. And this is the ultimate objective, and this is the most valuable part of the campaign. That popular pressure campaigns that have emerged are signs of the movement coalescing around strategic objectives so that we can ensure that when we hit, it lands. And so I want to just conclude by saying that again and again, imperialism shows its true face as the planet's most complicit polluter and destroyer of both the natural and human environment that makes life possible. There can be no climate justice without the dismantling of the imperialist system that seeks to uphold genocide for profit and enforce forever wars as official state policy. And that the struggle for a livable planet is inextricable from the struggle against the world system of imperialism. The fate of each is bound up with each other, and each serves as a constant reminder that another world is possible if we're willing to fight for it.
And Thanks so much, Yusuf.
Cool. Hello. My name is Yusuf. My pronouns are they, she, and I lead outreach and partnerships for the Youth Climate Finance Alliance. We're a youth-led and youth-centered organization that enables youth and student organizers under the age of 30 and youth and student organizations to build and wield power to target the financial engine that powers fossil-fueled capitalist imperialism. We've recently begun seeding eco-socialist and anti-imperialist chapters called Ignition Front across the so-called US, with organizers building up chapters in cities like Chicago, Houston, Corpus Christi, Texas, in Montana, in Boston, and indeed right here in New York City. Ignition Front emerged as the practical arm of both the criticisms that we and many more have levied at the US climate movement for its long-time commitment to upholding US-led capitalist imperialism and white supremacy. And indeed, it's this critique that has brought many of us out here today. But Ignition Front also emerged out of a positive vision, a vision for a youth and student movement, for a climate movement, and more broadly, for a US left that was capable of building the kind of solidarity that Che Guevara advocated for when discussing Vietnamese resistance to the American war in the 60s. Ignition Front is a project designed to build the kind of solidarity with the global South and with all oppressed peoples and nations that does more than simply wish success to the oppressed, that does more than say, oh, we stand with you, we support you, to Palestinians resisting genocide and Black and brown communities in the Gulf South resisting fossil fuel expansion that is poisoning them and their families. We aim to build the kind of solidarity that moves us from we support you, maintaining the separation between us and them, to the kind of solidarity that says we are you, the kind of solidarity that allows us to understand every fight being fought in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Iran, in Yemen, in Houston, in Corpus Christi, and so for Louisiana, and right here in New York City, not as interconnected struggles, but as one unitary struggle against US-led fossil-fueled capitalist imperialism. As Che says, it is not a matter of wishing success to the victim of aggression, but of sharing his fate. One must accompany him to his death or to victory. And that's the kind of movement that we need to build here in the US, especially in the face of a planetary crisis like the climate crisis. But the question I want to start off asking today here in this room is why? Why now and why us? And of course, there's the easy, low-hanging fruit that it's almost climate week, and the ruling class is about to hang out, pretend to care about the worsening climate crisis, and pretend to care about it probably over margaritas, and all the while, they will continue to set this world and the oppressed of this world on fire. They will continue putting their profits over our lives, and certainly over the lives of people like my people in Pakistan, currently suffering right now, as Climate Week is about to happen, from climate disasters and floods right now, despite being one of the lowest carbon emitters in the world. That's the easy answer, that the fossil capitalists and the fossil imperialists will be here, and so we must be here too. But there is a larger, more fundamental reason for why we are here today, why we are here in this room. And that's because the domestic climate movement in the US has completely abandoned its duty, its obligation to the oppressed within the so-called US, and especially to the oppressed of the global South by being all too friendly with warmongers, with imperialism, and with the colonization and neo-colonization of the global South and of the third world. We are here because the climate movement has failed in its duty of solidarity and has failed to draw the line and say no to what many of our comrades in Code Pink call the elephant in the room. The climate movement has failed in its duty to say no to US imperialism and militarism. An unfortunate consequence of the domestic climate movement's failure to be anti-imperialist is that there is an understandable lack of trust by many anti-imperialists within the US of ecological movements here, which further hinders our ability to actually build an eco-socialist and internationalist movement here, to actually combat the very problem that climate activists claim to be fighting. And this is the problem we are here to solve today. We're here today to solve the problem of there being two separate climate and anti-imperialist movements. Now this, of course, leads us to a really, really important follow-up question, which is, how the fuck do we solve that problem? For YCFA and Ignition Front, as an organization emerging from and agitating within the climate movement, and in collaboration and in coordination with incredible anti-imperialist organizations like Code Pink and the many other organizations represented here, we see the goal as not connecting two distinct movements, but fusing them together into one struggle. For YCFA and Ignition Front, we see the goal as fusing the climate and anti-imperialist movement through a sharper analysis of how fossil capitalism and fossil-fueled imperialism are the root cause of the climate crisis and drive imperialist violence. In other words, we have to point out constantly and repeatedly that our movements and the problems we are trying to solve are driven by the very same base system. And then we have to actualize that analysis in our movement. It's not enough to have the right analysis, we have to put it into practice. And this is a key reason that YCFA campaigns against Citibank, a central institution in the fossil capitalist imperialist world system. Citi makes clear how the climate and anti-imperialist struggle have the same villains because Citibank is the same villain. Citibank has been the largest financer of fossil fuel expansion since the Paris Agreement, and Citibank was the first foreign financial institution to enter into Israel and remains the largest foreign financial institution in Israel, playing a key role in facilitating the flow of arms, fuel, and capital from the so-called US to Israel. In other words, Citibank is a central node and points out and embodies the fossil capitalist and fossil imperialist system that drives both militarism and the climate crisis. And that's the system that we need to be constantly pointing out is the villain. And the reality is, the stakes have never been higher for us. The climate crisis is worsening, and US aggression and imperialism is becoming increasingly violent. The US seems interested, especially now, in moving from a Cold War on China to a hot war, which is especially problematic for solving the climate crisis, which China has made incredible progress on solving. And as all of this is happening, as we're moving from a Cold War with China to a hot war, the genocide in Gaza continues, and all of these crises are driven by the same system of fossil-fueled, US-led capitalist imperialism. At a time when a strong, militant, mass eco-socialist movement should be forcing the US to stop the genocide and to engage in climate talks with China to prevent a World War III, we are nowhere to be found. And that is a huge problem, and one that is up to all of us in this room to solve. The stakes have never been higher, and we need to meet the moment with the bravery, the intelligence, and most importantly, with the organization it requires. If fossil imperialism and fossil capitalism are the problem, and if Citibank represents that problem, then eco-socialism and fighting fossil imperialists like Citibank is the solution. It is, as it has always been, up to us to build the kind of unified movement, to build the kind of world we want. And I'm thankful to be part of an organization like YCFA and in a room with people and organizations like you all that are interested in building the kind of eco-socialist and anti-imperialist movement and working to ignite frontline fights against fossil-fueled imperialism everywhere. And I invite all young people and all students and all people under the age of 30 to join us in the campaign against Citibank and say we refuse to work for fossil imperialists anymore.
Sorry, I can't join. I'm too old to join, I guess, but I'll be there in solidarity.
There's a role for everyone.
All right, great, yeah. I'll chaperone, yeah.
They might not like that.
Okay. So, Austin.
Yeah, I love going last. This is great. Y'all said so much already. I'm like, I don't need to say that much. Yeah, cosign. I do, before I lose this in my brain, I do just want to mention, I'm glad you mentioned Citibank, because Citibank also facilitated and took over the occupation of Haiti. Before 1915, when the US occupied Haiti, they took over the bank system from France, right? So they took over all of Haiti's national finances, and then they helped pay for and facilitate the occupation of the US from 1915 to 1934, and then remain in Haiti. And the F-35 program, I think, is like so critical that people pay attention to that, because not only all of the things that were mentioned, and you might have mentioned this as well, but it's already, since 2023, I believe it's already cost US taxpayers $485 billion, and it's projected to cost US taxpayers $2 trillion by the time all is said and done for the F-35s, and that's completely coming from taxpayer funding, right? So, and it's completely mismanaged and all these things, and it is destroying our planet and destroying our people as well, right? Not to mention polluting environments that are primarily Black, immigrant, and working class communities where the F-35 pieces in the US are actually being created. So I just wanted to say that before I lost my train of thought later. But thank you all. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Austin. I am part of the Black Alliance for Peace, and we are an anti-war, anti-militarism, anti-imperialist, and pro-peace organization that is an alliance of individuals and organizations, both Afro-descendant individuals, but also people in solidarity. So anyone can join the Solidarity Network. And our work is really centered on what we call in defeating the war against Black African people in the US and abroad. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about war later, but we're here in a similar vein, as Yusuf mentioned, to talk about climate because of the gaps that we see, the gaps that Code Pink has for years, stepped in to fill, the gaps that many of you, I'm sure, are filling in your different organizations as activists, but that are still wide, right? And we've already heard a ton about mainstream environmental organizations and the issues with that, right? And I also want to talk about many of the Black and African-led NGOs as well, or NGOs representing other communities which claim to represent frontline communities, right, have also been absorbed into that movement, right, whether, by choice or not. And so what has happened is there's obviously tokenism, right? And there's compromised stances when it comes to actually naming the enemies and fighting the roots of the crisis and violence that we face. Meanwhile, our communities, right, continue to endure environmental warfare, ecological degradation, and climate catastrophe. So there's been a lot of focus, in the environmentalist movement, in the climate and environmental justice movement about centering frontline communities, and that is critical. Right? But if we're not centering frontline communities and centering the global, national, local structures of capitalism and militarism, the specific enemies, then at best we're offering band-aid solutions and we're telling people to stay on a sinking ship and telling them it can be repaired while it's sinking. Or as Martin Luther King Jr. said, right, we're integrating people into a burning house, right? And I'm not trying to get burned up. I don't know about y'all. But I think that for all of us in this moment, right, in this moment of accelerating climate crisis, ecological collapse, we know, and it's probably stated ad nauseum, that it disproportionately impacts indigenous, Black, African, colonized, oppressed, working class, and poor communities, right, around the world. Right, the world system that we live in is rooted in white supremacy and patriarchy and colonialism, and the foundations of capitalism are expressed in these toxic industries, right? In militarism, in energy systems that don't serve us and hurt us, and in agriculture that poisons our land, our water, and our air. And so most Black and African people, working class folks, are locked into that system, right? We're locked into a system that destroys our life expectancy, whether acutely, right, or chronically over time, right? And we're concentrated in these climate vulnerable areas, right? And so not only are we concentrated in that, but the weak sort of regulations and protections that are getting weaker but have never been robust to begin with, right? If you want to talk, about the Great Flood of Mississippi in 1927 and how that was realized later, I'm happy to do that later. But FEMA's anti-Black policies, insurance discrimination, right, the rollbacks of SNAP and Medicaid, austerity-driven privatization, not to mention genocide happening globally and genocide happening here in this country, right? Because we know that Paul Robeson and the Communist Party of the USA and many other folks charged the US with genocide back in 1953. And so as I'm mentioning, right, none of this stuff, obviously, as I think most of us know, started with Trump. It didn't start with Bush or Clinton or Reagan or even Truman, right? Although different people have different strategies that have disproportionate effects on people, the central issue is imperialism. It is capitalism and colonialism. And those structures are war, right? So war is the elephant in the room, but war is also a structure against our nation and our peoples, against our neighborhoods, and against our earth, right? And if we understand war, we can think of it as, some have labeled it as the strategic invasion, destabilization, dispossession, and at times elimination of a community, people, land, resources, culture, customs, and agency, right? And so if we think about Gaza and all of Palestine, we should know that long before Al-Aqsa flood, Gaza was determined to be moving towards being unlivable already, right? Was the condition that it was in because of water and food insecurity, because people were trapped in an open air prison, right? And so we understand that the ecocide and the genocide of war that we are seeing live streamed on our TVs has been here, right? The structures are the structures that we've already lived under since Columbus got lost and landed in Hispaniola. We've been living in war, we've been living in apocalypse, right? And the system is built around that to sustain it. So it is a feature, right? And so even though a lot of well-meaning people obviously are making lifestyle changes to address climate change, and while we can, address the military expenditures and bloated emissions, we also have to understand that war, but just changing those factors, right, is not going to change the structure of war that we live under, that destroys our people. And so for us as African peoples, right, in the Black Alliance for Peace, we understand we have to root our work in radical and anti-imperialist frameworks that identify and work to dismantle those systems of oppression that militarize our earth, right? Whether it's in Palestine, on the continent of Africa, in our Americas. Imperialism necessitates the elimination of our peoples, right? It necessitates the erosion of self-determination, the dispossession of land, the destruction of culture, whether that's using lawfare or brute force, right? Whether that's using co-optation or counterinsurgency, all that goal is still the same. And so for us, I don't want to get too much into it now. I'm sure we have time for questions and we can talk about it later. But we have a couple of campaigns that, we try to incorporate some of this work into and are trying to incorporate more of this work into. And so if you've heard about BAP, you've probably heard the slogan, no compromise, no retreat. But it's more than a slogan, right? It's also a campaign. And it's focused on 4 kind of central objectives that each have, demands behind them. And so one, to demilitarize the United States by eliminating the programs that facilitate arming and colonial training of police forces and law enforcement, to dismantle the militarized infrastructure of US-led imperialism and the US-EU-NATO axis of domination, to assert our sovereignty, dignity, and right to self-determination of African and Black peoples and all peoples and nations globally, and to support national policy imperatives that reduce militarized power and advance people-centered human rights. And so we understand that this is a broad campaign, right? A broad framework for us to take different strategies and tactics, but to provide a common collective direction, right? To do the things like ensuring that we are not siloed in our different quote unquote movements, right? And so this is the kind of central campaign of BAP, and we invite people to get connected, to engage with us around the objectives or any of the specific demands that we can talk about at another time. And then we also are part of a collective campaign called the Campaign for a Zone of Peace in our Americas. And this is an effort to build that we launched in 2023 in Washington, D.C., Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and Havana, Cuba, with 13 other organizations throughout the hemisphere, and have grown since then, to build what was called for in the 2014 CELAC, Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, for the Americas to be a zone of peace, right? And that has several different components to it. But we understand that states can call for that, and states can do what they can attempt to do. Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Bolivia, others can try to institute things, but actually guaranteeing that is only possible through grassroots popular power, right? Through mass organization. Only that can fulfill the political objectives of that work. And so we are also in line with that, building a mass-based coordinating structure to facilitate the achievement of those demands. And the co-coordinator is here giving you all stuff right here, so you could talk to her as well later. But that work we see is really critical because folks hopefully know about what's happening in the Caribbean with Venezuela, with that the U.S. is circling. The U.S., those things don't emerge from nowhere, right? The U.S. has been doing this operation called Operation Trade Winds in the Caribbean to, quote unquote, practice climate environmental resiliency, right? But when do they mobilize, right? They don't really mobilize after hurricanes, right? They don't mobilize after natural disasters. They mobilize to attack Venezuela, right? And they already have those centers. So also understanding that is really important. And so not to, I don't want to step out of my time. So just to close out, I do want to reiterate for us, we have some of these like concrete structures that we are incorporating the work of climate and environment into and connecting that with militarism, whether it's abroad or militarism here domestically. But I do want to reiterate that this work is, as we all know, so urgent, right? It is a system, I said it's a structure that has been here, but we are reaching we are reaching a point, I mean, we're past a certain point of no return, but we're reaching a point where we are fighting not only for human well-being, not only for a better system, right? Like our, like our ancestors were maybe fighting for, but we are fighting for survival, right? And so the gap in our movements, in our anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, and environmentalist or climate movements cannot exist for much longer, right? The consistent unwillingness of certain movements, whether because of their bourgeois character or their affiliation with the Democratic Party, their unwillingness to take stands not only about the genocide in Gaza, the genocides in Sudan, in the Congo, right? The devastation ecologically, environmentally, climatically that has been happening in African communities, in immigrant communities for decades, for generations, right? Is something that can no longer, that we can no longer afford to allow, right? So we have to move past those limitations, right? We have to move past the limitations of climate and environmental justice because there can be no justice for our people, right? If there is not a concerted and long-term effort to dismantle those systems once and for all. And so we in BAP say, one of our principles of unity around peace is that peace is not the absence of conflict. Right? It requires defeating those systems of oppression, like imperialism, colonialism, capitalism, white supremacy, and patriarchy. And there can be no peace without liberation. And liberation can only come through principled and consistent resistance and supporting people's just right to resist. And resistance requires organization, right? And so organizing the masses of our people is our duty. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. So we're going to open it up to audience Q&A shortly, but I just wanted to ask each of you a question that's kind of a personal question, but has political ramifications. I want to know how each of you personally discovered these connections between the various issues that you work on, like how you saw that they exist outside of these silos. And I'm asking you that because I'm interested and I'm curious about it, but also in the hopes that in your articulating your own journey or realization or aha moment or gradual discovery, you can also empower others to see how they can communicate this in a way that's accessible to people who aren't necessarily, well-versed in political theory. So whoever wants to start first.
I'll go. I'll try to be quick. I think I'll say two anecdotes, two moments for me. So like is in my bio, I think it's really important that, I'm from Ohio. I grew up in Ohio. But my family's from Mississippi and Alabama. And it was really important to me when I was in grad school, I led a civil rights trip, right? And it was really important to me that people understand the civil rights movement, not in what people call civil rights movement, right? But like actually as a struggle for freedom. And we went to Alabama. My dad is from Birmingham. The house that he grew up in no longer exists because they put a highway right through the black neighborhood, not only to destroy it, but also to break up the power that was in that neighborhood because it was in a similar, it was the same neighborhood that Angela Davis lived in and a few other folks, right? And also in order to disroot people, right? Just to take people off away so you're now dispossessed from your land, right? Even if you hadn't been on that land for generations, it was where you were from, right? It's a house you grew up in. And we also saw in Birmingham, we did a lot of environmental justice, kind of climate justice tours, and we saw the maps. I studied urban planning, so I'm a map nerd, I guess, but we studied the redlining maps, right? Birmingham is one of the most segregated cities in the US, and the maps of redlining in Birmingham not only map up already still with the maps of neighborhoods that are like 99% black, but they also line up almost perfectly with neighborhoods that face the greatest amount of pollution from coke plants in Birmingham, because Birmingham is it's called the Pittsburgh of the South, and it's one of the few locations in the world where actually you have naturally occurring all the minerals you need to make steel. And so all of these black neighborhoods, people still live there. The coke plants are still there. Some of them have gotten shut down, but there's so many people that live there. All of them have asthma, COPD, or lung cancer, right? And so they were redlined into those neighborhoods because they said we don't care what happens to these black people. And they still live in those neighborhoods because as our comment Susan was talking about, the Agent Orange, the pollution has been there for hundreds of years. They've been producing steel since the 1880s, right? And so the pollution has been there for over 140 years. One of the plants just got shut down in 2022. And so even though the EPA under Biden took out the, quote unquote, took out the polluted land, all they did was take out the first 10 feet. And they said, okay, you're good. And they also said, well, if you want to leave, you can leave. But the land is worthless because no one wants to live right next to a Coke plant, right? And so these people have lived there their entire life. They have nowhere to go. Their land is worthless. Many of them used to work at the plant, but the jobs have been automated for many of them. And so they've lost their employment as well, right? And so for me, that is like a very crystallizing point of all of these things where you might think about Birmingham with Bull Connor and the hoses and all of these things around the military occupation of Birmingham. But it is also so much, it is also so ingrained in the system that people live with every single day and continue to live with every single day, whether they are under a Republican or a Democrat administration, because Birmingham has a black Democrat mayor, right? A young black Democrat mayor, and they are also not offering any resolution. So I was going to say something else, but I'll stop there as well, because I think that took long enough.
I was going to say really briefly, because you summed up a lot of what I was thinking. I mean, if the last 2 years don't show you how imperialism functions as a system, the last 2 years of the genocide in Gaza don't show you that, then I think it's a clear articulation of how our world works. And I think also, but I'll say that, and then if I remember it, I'll continue.
I think one of the when I talk about this, I always am trying to make clear that it's not like we're pro-climate and anti-militarism, where we're anti-fossil capitalism and fossil imperialism, and trying to transcend the system of capitalist imperialism, and fight for like eco-socialism. So I always try to make it clear that they're not interconnected, but that they're one and the same. But I think the real moment where I went from understanding that like theoretically and to really thinking about the political implications of that in our practice was when we were doing some research at the beginning of our City Bank campaign, and we were beginning to think about how this campaign could act as a way to fuse these two currently separate movements. We read a lot about the history of Palestinian resistance. And one of the things that the climate movement in the US really doesn't mention a lot is that Palestinian resistance actually pioneered pipeline sabotage. Because in the 1930s, Palestinian resistance understood fossil capital and these pipelines and this extraction as being a key pillar of the material basis that was part of their oppression, that was maintaining their oppression. And they understood combating these pipelines and physically sabotaging these pipelines as being a key way to fight for their land back, and to fight for their liberation. And that tactic spread globally, including in indigenous resistance here within the so-called US, and indigenous resistance in the so-called US for their land back. And that tactic spread, but very infrequently is credit given to Palestinian resistance by climate organizers. Many of the big greens are very verbally supportive of pipeline resistance here in the US. But it's important to note that, and again, verbally supportive. But it's important to note that tactic has an origin, it has a history, and is like pioneered by the resistance in Palestine. And from the very beginning of the Palestinian resistance in the 1930s, or some of the earliest like iterations of Palestinian resistance understood how fossil fuels maintained their oppression and how the extraction of their fossil fuels and the violation of Palestinian sovereignty was tied with fossil fuels. And that's not something that's new. This is not a new development that we're making in the face of a worsening climate crisis. This is actually an old development, like almost 100 years old development that we lost sight of. And maybe that we in the so-called US never really had our eyes on. But I think like reading about that history was one of those things that made it really clear to me that this is and has to be one fight if we are serious about winning. And that we can't keep splitting up over and over and over again into these different segmented movements, especially when our villains are very much one and the same and very much united.
Thank you. Did you have anything to add? Did you? Okay, because I have a question for you if you haven't recovered the, okay, that's all, yeah. I want to know, something that understandably you hear a lot from people, and I think this does reveal the way that the connection between climate, militarism, genocide, imperialism has been obfuscated is people say, how can you talk about climate when there's a genocide going on right now? And that, of course, obscures the ecocide that's happening, that obscures the slow death that will happen because of the environmental poisoning and degradation. So I just want to know if you had any response to that and any luck with communicating to people the connection between the violent deaths that we're seeing and the slower deaths that come through this environmental degradation.
Yeah, I mean, it's been brought up a couple of times actually in the context of like different countries, but the ecocide that happened in Vietnam, Iraq was mentioned, and this is something that like we've talked about a lot, and we are thinking about the fact that there is a hidden toll that's going to emerge from this genocide. The amount of unexploded ordinances, the billions of tons of debris and rubble that are also leading to health complications. There's also like health complications that we don't know what will emerge when new generations are born. I mean, Iraq, if you think about Fallujah, which was the campaign against Fallujah 20 years ago. I mean, people are still being born with lead, that amounts of lead that's still present in their bodies, and they're still dealing with health complications. And so this is something that we know that there's a toll of deaths from the genocide that we know now, but then there's also an entire generations that we don't know how will be impacted by this. And so I think it's very clear that there is a connection between the genocide, the bombing campaign, ammunition, like all of these things are definitely caused, that will definitely perpetuate worse, not just like the environment, but also the people that are impacted.
And of course, one of the uses of the big lie, well, there's so many lies, but one of the lies about Gaza, about the conflict, I'm putting that in quotes, is that this is an ancient hatred, Muslims and Jews just can't get along, and obviously that ignores the fact that they're Christians, but people don't really care about being logical, consistent. But that focus on some kind of prehistoric almost enmity between peoples totally obscures the land grab aspect of it, and of course the effect on the land, which then affects people. But wanted to open it up to audience Q&A, and then we're going to have our wonderful keynote speaker. So does anyone have any questions? And if so, I guess, Aaron, do you want to pass around a mic? Yeah.
One question I have is, I think a lot of climate organizations that don't focus on the military at all are kind of putting a lot of focus on personal carbon footprint. And I'm curious, like, how, like, maybe y'all's opinion on, like, how much your personal carbon footprint matters while the U.S. military is polluting so much, or how to balance carbon footprint and military, or how to talk with someone who's really obsessed with personal carbon footprint about the military being a bigger issue, or how all that works. So, yeah.
Without making them feel bad or stupid, right?
I can start off. I think the personal carbon footprint argument is used a lot less by many like organizations with climate or like environmental in their name than it was even just a few years ago. Like it's not a talking point that's used as often, especially because the climate crisis is getting worse and worse, and the climate movement, for all its problems, has been doing a better job of like naming like fossil fuel companies as villains-ish. Now, that being said, I think there's still a lot of people that really care about their personal carbon footprint. Many of my closest loved ones are vegan, and I am an ally of the vegan community. I think it's very much like a yes and situation. Like it's actually good for people, especially in the global north and in the core, to lower our consumption habits, because we very, very much do overconsume. And that our ability to do that is at the detriment of the global south. But also that's not going to stop these big, like, our consumer habits are not like changing. Is not going to stop these companies from fucking everything up. And so getting people to move from like a yes, I will make this personal life choice, and also I'm going to get involved in an eco-socialist organization and fight for a better world and get organized, rather than like a no, don't do that. It's a yes and situation.
I mean, I think agree with everything that was just said, and I think it also goes beyond just the environmental and climate movement around personal footprint. It also is like, what are we trying to accomplish, right? If I want to feel better about myself, then that's great, right? If I want to have like a 0.00000000001% impact on like climate, that's great. But if I want to actually like, if we want to change the system so that like everybody can survive, then we should be putting more energy into like doing the work of changing that system than we are in like, what exactly am I tracking in my personal climate footprint, right? And I think that that's the like mentality, and that goes beyond, again, climate footprint. It goes with other actions as well, right? Does me posting on Instagram about something, like, is that a bad thing? No, I mean, it could be, but in itself, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? But what is it doing, right? And so if I'm wasting all my energy doing that, it's like, I should probably get up and join a movement that is trying to change a system that is actually causing these harms, right? And I think that that is like unfortunately in this country, you know, I assume most of the people that are here probably live in the US, like our culture is so individualized, right? And it's so focused on individual choices and behaviors, and every aspect of the ruling class and of like the elite corporations and all, they're playing into that 1,000% all the time, right? I mean, that's why they created, I mean, it was created by fossil fuel companies, right? This idea of individual footprint. And so, yeah, I think that it goes beyond that too, though. It goes into all of our movement work. Again, it's not a bad thing to do individual things, right? But it's like, what are we actually trying to accomplish? If we were trying to accomplish that systemic change, that requires organization, and that requires actually pointing ourselves to the things that are going to like materially make a change, not just like make us feel better or make us like hypothetically right? But like, what will actually change the suffering, right? What will actually change the injustices and the oppression? What will actually stop the genocide, right? Not what do we feel best about saying, or you know, what do we, you know, what can we post on social media?
Hello, I have two questions, so if you're not able to answer one, that's totally okay. So the first question is around, from the three campaigns that you guys mentioned, so the Citibank one, Mayor's, and then the No Compromise, No Retreat, what are some key lessons that you guys would be able to share that would be helpful for some folks who are in the process of campaign development, really thinking about what's the campaign structure, what is the campaign strategy that will actually lead to change and impact? And then my other question is around, what are some gaps that you guys are noticing and identifying, either around like the narrative that's needed in this like demilitarization climate space, and just broader like impacting imperialism and putting a dent in it, and or from like so either narrative or else like specific targets that have not been like explored and targeted enough. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my question is for the Palestinian Youth Movement. So basically when you were starting the Mask Off Mayor's campaign, how did you find all that information? Like what was the research process like? Because that's incredibly detailed and like that's so much information.
I mean, really briefly, a lot of this information is, I mean, we have an incredible research team, and it was also done in coordination with people who are very skilled in research in this kind of like corporate type research. A lot of it was actually public. A lot of the information on like how to find, for example, like what a shipping container is carrying. I mean, it's very tedious. It takes a lot of work, but a lot of it is public, and a lot of it, like for example, tracking shipments of certain containers, I guess that like it takes a lot of this information becomes public like months later. So if you look at some of our research reports, like our first research report that came out like last year is detailing shipments that were like months after what we had, like months after the genocide, because that was the first time that they had become like then public information. But a lot of this information is public and very skilled though. And yeah, we can chat also after if you'd like.
And then a question about key lessons for campaign development and gaps in our narrative or targets or lessons. You guys.
I was just going to say real quick on the research question, Lauren is also building up an Ignition Front chapter here in New York, just by the way, just so everyone knows. But there's this organization called Little Sis, and I'll show you all their resources, but they do really like great trainings on like how to do research like for like your campus, for corporate targets, for all these things, and all of their trainings are recorded. So I'm going to send you the giant Google Drive link that I go to, and if anybody else wants that, I'll send it to you guys too. That shit's like a gold mine. And then I will let somebody else answer the other question while I continue to think.
It's a really good question, and it's something I think about a lot. On the campaign development side, yeah, I think it is the couple of things. Well, one, I would just give a caveat, or not caveat, I would just give a note that like dialectical materialism is dope, and thinking dialectically and learning and understanding how we kind of, how we both attack specific parts and the whole is very, very critical frame of reference for thinking, right? And tool to utilize. But I think tactically in doing that, like understanding what is our goal, like what is our goal at the end of the day, our vision, right? Of like what we are trying to achieve that is like big, high level thing, right? And then like what is the actual thing that this specific campaign is focused on? And then within that, what are some very specific goals that we can lay out in that campaign? And not only just tactically in terms of like we want to do this, we want to do that, but objectives that will like cover the whole understanding of not only like what are we doing, how are we doing it, and where will we be after we have won this? Because a lot of this stuff at the end of the day, and I bring up dialectical materialism, but I also think very strongly like we're human, we don't understand everything about the world, right? We're not gonna be able to take every factor in, and like chaos and randomness happens, right? So I'll say like I did, when I was in school, I did like a reading group where we were trying to get people organized, and we did it for like 2 years, and we were like studying all this stuff and trying to build these campaigns with mostly black folks, and then Al-Aqsa flood happened, and like 3 days later there was like 4 times as many people in the book club, and there were people ready to do all these things, and we had some infrastructure of what we were doing, and we're like, oh, okay, like I guess we should like run with that and do it. And we were beforehand we were like, well, like we don't know if this is really working, right? But that showed that like all of the building that we were doing for 2 years, we were then able to like utilize that towards something, right? So for some campaigns, right, you might have like a very specific target and a very specific local thing that you were trying to do, or it could be really big. But I think what's really important is like, how is your campaign also fueling the movement that you are fighting towards or with, right? Because some external factor could come and change everything, right? And if that singular campaign no longer makes sense, that might be okay, right? But if your movement goes away, then it was never really a movement to start, right? It was like always a very small tactical thing. So I would think about like, how is everything that we're doing sort of scaling up, not only to be useful for like our singular objective over the next month, over the next 3 months, but also how is it building the infrastructure, the education, the consciousness, the relationships for our movement to be sustained generationally, right? Or for however long it needs to be. And I would argue that we need like generational movements to defeat imperialism, right? Like, again, there is urgency, and we also have to practice like patience, that we're not going to just like change everything right away, but we need to be consistently day after day building. I think Ella Baker said like you need to make the struggle every day, right? And so I think that bringing that into your campaigns is really critical, and saying like, okay, even if we only get 10 people in this room, that is a quantitative understanding, but there's also a qualitative understanding of like, who are those 10 people? And what are those 10 people prepared to do? Because 10 people who are coming and are down to read a book chapter and then go home and not think about it until next week is very different than 10 people who are down to every day be organizing, be knocking on doors, be building out, because those 10 people can get 10 more people, and they can get 10 more people, and that was the 10-10-10 program of the Black Panther Party, right? And so like thinking about those at every step of like, how is this meeting not just a meeting about the content, but how is it also a step in our movement building? And so making sure you're building that stuff into your campaigns and building enough flexibility that you have a good idea of what you're doing, but if the conditions change, you are able to still utilize what you are building towards those changing conditions.
Well, I'm going to bring Jody back onto the stage. Oh, can I just make one plug, Jody, about a project? Sorry, I forgot to ask you to put this in my bio, but just because we are talking about kind of maybe hidden connections or surprising connections, I do want to say that I'm working on a documentary right now about Jewish Holocaust survivors who are speaking out against the genocide. So just another example of things that, Yeah, sure, definitely. I will be posting them shortly. If you on my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/The Katie Halper Show. Yeah, and I have a lot of people from the Code Pink world on that show. So, and I'm going to have you guys on if you'll come on. Okay, thanks so much. Thanks, everyone. Can you get up and get your down
You can follow our Instagram, Palestinian Youth Movement, for our national Instagram, but our local one is NYCPYM. Or you can come talk to me.
Is this on already? Oh, YCFA's Instagram is @YouthClimateFinance, and Ignition Front's is ignitionfront.national. If you're a young person and you're interested in joining Ignition Front, our bit.ly link is bit.ly/J join. I'm not going to remember. Go to our Instagram, it's there.
Cool, and yeah, you can look us up. Instagram is at Black Alliance for Peace. On Twitter, X, I believe it's Blacks for Peace. And then our website, blackallianceforpeace.com. And on these things, there's an email, and Amani gets the emails, so it's not just a random email that will not go anywhere. But you can do that where, yeah, you can come talk to us as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Can we please thank Katie and this panel? Wow, you learned a lot, right? Everybody is smarter. And I hope more fired up, because when we have information, it helps us have a stronger voice and feel confident with what we're doing. So fantastic. I learned a lot. And also I love the stories. Whew. And also they were describing exactly what we're doing here. So our keynote speaker was picked intentionally. And I'm very, very excited they're here. And This is someone who takes their platform as a climate leader, as someone who's scratched hardest and, won the biggest award, and brought their voice to other movements, and most recently, especially the Palestine movement. But that, which means a lot of you don't know who Steven is, so I want to introduce him. He's an American attorney known for his legal battles with Chevron, in which he represented over 30,000 farmers and indigenous people who suffered environmental damage and health problems caused by oil drilling. The Ecuadorian court awarded the plaintiffs $9.5 billion. That'd be like $13 billion right now in damages, which led Chevron to withdraw its assets from Ecuador. But it launched a legal battle against Steven and filed a RICO suit against him. As a result, he was disbarred, put in jail for 6 months, and then under house arrest. So how do we know he was successful? Wow, brutal, slapback. I think it's really funny. I'm introducing you right now, given that Code Pink and our wonderful Olivia are being threatened with RICO charges this week. See, we see that you're showing us it ain't so bad, right? You still survived, but that's what I'm going to say. You took it all, did not stop, did not stay silent. You have been out there helping. You've doubled down, actually. You're actually more visible, more there everywhere I go. You're supporting activists who are in the streets, doing the work, in the jungles, doing the work. And when October 7th happened, you pivoted your platform to have the backs of the Palestine movement. And you model what it is we're here to talk about. And so I'm so excited that you're our closing speaker tonight. Please come up, Steven Donziger.
Thank you so much, Jody. It's always scary when they put like this thing here as opposed to sitting there, but I'll see if I can handle it. Thank you. I'm okay. I'll try to see if I can wing it here. First of all, thank you for that lovely introduction, and thanks to Code Pink. You guys are an inspiration. I've learned so much from how you do your work and your activism, your leadership, your courage. Olivia, great courage. Your confrontation with Trump, was amazing. Thank you for doing that. I don't know how the hell you happen to be in that restaurant, but hey, And what's sort of interesting about my relationship to Code Pink is, I don't know, I assume some of you know my story, but real quickly, I started a case with a bunch of other lawyers against Chevron for polluting the Ecuadorian Amazon way back in 1993. And they fought us every step of the way. They tried to sabotage the case, which ended up in Ecuador's courts. And we fought years and years. I went there 250 times as a lawyer, like once a month for 20 years, working with the communities down there and lawyers in Ecuador. And ultimately, we prevailed in this historic landmark case. We won this very big judgment. By the way, the pollution down there is sickening, devastating. They deliberately dumped, as part of their engineering design, billions of gallons of cancer-causing toxic waste into the rainforest, into waters and streams that indigenous peoples had been drinking out of. Needless to say, many, many people got sick. Thousands have died. No one knows the precise number because no one's actually done, a recent epidemiological study, but many, many people have died and continue to die from this catastrophe. We had originally filed the case in New York courts because Texaco did this. Chevron later bought Texaco because Texaco's headquarters was here. And our clients in Ecuador are like, we want to be in the US because we don't trust our own court system. And Texaco, and then it was bought by Chevron. Chevron fought for years to move the case down to Ecuador, saying, oh, this is the best place to do the case. And we fought that, but they won that battle. We went down to Ecuador, continued the case, litigated the hell out of it year after year. It's extremely tenacious, difficult kind of case. No one had really done this before. Indigenous communities had never really taken on a big US oil company in their own courts for this amount of money. Ultimately, we won, and instead of paying the judgment, they had promised to pay any adverse judgment as a condition of moving the case back down to Ecuador. But when we won, they reneged on that, and they ended up coming here and they sued me personally under the civil racketeering law here in New York in the very same court that we had originally filed a case in that they didn't want the case to be in. And they sued me for treble on, the initial judgment, by the way, was 20 billion. It got cut in half on appeal in Ecuador. But under civil RICO, you're entitled to treble damages. So they in theory, were like suing me for $60 billion. And I think I hold the record for the individual in the history of this country who's been sued for the most amount of money, which I lean into. Proud of that. And, you know, I can talk a lot about how to deal with RICO, and I will talk a little bit about it because that's sort of the big threat now, coming out of the White House in light of, you know, in the wake of the Charlie Kirk assassination, et cetera. But we got through the RICO, they denied me a jury, the judge predictably ruled against me. But to avoid a jury, they had to drop all the money damages, so I didn't have to owe them any money. They just had this judgment, which they tried to use in foreign courts to block us from enforcing the Ecuador judgment against their assets in that country to force them to pay for the damage they had caused in Ecuador. So we kept going. We won a unanimous decision in Canada by the Canadian Supreme Court in 2015, allowing the communities to litigate in Canada to try to seize their assets. And after that, they concocted this theory that I needed to give them my confidential case file in my computer. And I told the US judge I would not do that. I asked him to hold me in contempt of court so I could appeal his order, because in a civil case, you can't really appeal automatically a civil discovery order, meaning a dispute about do you turn over documents or not, or do you do a deposition or not. Those are all like, you know, civil litigation things that happen. You just can't appeal those things in the course of a trial unless you're held in contempt. So I begged the judge to hold me in contempt of court, which, by the way, is usually a very humiliating thing for a lawyer, to be held in contempt of court. But like I saw the game they were playing, and that would have given me a right to appeal this interim order. So, you know, the judge knew what I was doing. He didn't want to hold me in contempt because he didn't want his decision to be reviewed by the appellate court, the decision to turn over my computer and case file. He finally held me in contempt. I appealed his order, and while my appeal of his, I believe, illegal order was pending, he charged me with contempt of court, which is a criminal charge, and had me locked up pre-trial. This is a misdemeanor charge. It's the lowest level offense in the federal system. And it was also baseless, but even assuming it was not baseless, like there's never been a lawyer other than me locked up in this country on a misdemeanor contempt of court charge. I was shocked. It's a lesson, right? Because like, as you sort of game out where this stuff is going in this country right now, when I sort of gamed out worst case things that could happen as a result of doing this case, it never occurred to me that I could be locked up. Never occurred to me. I'm glad it didn't, because it might have changed my commitment to the case, you know, but it did happen. And you know, when I got home with this ankle bracelet on me, I figured, well, I got to get a lawyer, and this will be off in a week or two when I go back to court and file a motion. And it lasted almost 3 years. Literally every week I'd wake up, and I had these legal pads. You guys talk from your computers. By the way, to the other panelists, you guys did great. Your analyses are so sharp. I learned so much from listening to you. Thank you for what you do. It's weird to follow you guys. You guys are so sharp. I'm sort of more of just a lawyer, but you'll have to excuse me. I thought, I could get this thing off in a week or two. And we went back to court. And the judge looked at me like I was some sort of crazy man and said, no, I'm not taking your ankle bracelet off. You could flee the country. Your clients in Ecuador love you. You could end up down in the jungle and they would harbor you in Ecuador. I mean, I have a wife and a kid at the time. My son was like 14 years old. I'm facing a misdemeanor, like I'm really gonna go do that, right? I'm just gonna flee the United States and be an international fugitive and live in the Amazon the rest of my life. Although, not a terrible option, but I would never do that. That was just crazy. And this was all just concocted, manufactured BS, so they could advance some sort of legal argument to keep me in an ankle bracelet. So it lasted a long time. Every day I'd wake up and I have these little legal pads. This is a big one, but I have like these little ones because I could sort of reduce all the shit I have to do into like a small piece of paper every day. And I'd make lists every day of what I could do to get that ankle bracelet off and what I could do to survive. And it was this time of year in 2019. That's when I got arrested on August 6, 2019. So it was the week of the UN General Assembly and Climate Week that year. A bunch of people came by my house to visit me, like the head of Amnesty International and Atosa and Layla from Amazon Watch, my friends who I'd worked with for many years. And I remember we were sitting in my living room and I'm like half freaked out, and Layla says, and I'd been like with this ankle bracelet for like 30 or 40 days, and she says, when it gets to 100 days, let's like do a big press release. And I didn't say that. I'm thinking in my head, like, are you crazy? It's never gonna get to 100 days. Like, I'm not gonna have this ankle bracelet, hopefully not next week or the week after. And as I started, as this went on, I started to realize that it wasn't coming off. Like, it wasn't about law, fairness, or anything. It was about corporate persecution with the complicity of the US judiciary to punish the F out of me for having the temerity to go to Harvard Law School and decide to help people. By the way, Harvard Law School, okay, I am a person of relative privilege, okay, and they hated me for that. They felt I betrayed my background. The judge also went to Harvard Law School who did this, Judge Kaplan, and there was a viciousness to what they were doing to me that, was notable and also kind of really upset me. So we did hit the 100 days, we hit 200 days, we hit 300 days. We started to have rallies every 100 days. Like, got a tremendous amount of solidarity and support from people in New York. We'd have rallies on my street. I live up on 104th Street on the west side. I would have a bullhorn. I'd speak out the window onto the street. Katie came by. Katie, I haven't seen you in ages. Great to see you. She's a great journalist, okay? Had me on her show while I was in detention. And I started to talk. I mean, initially my lawyer said, don't talk, the judge will hate you. So I went like 2-3 months. I didn't even do one thing. I just sat around in my house. And I started to take interviews and I started to talk. And as Jody pointed out, I don't think they expected me to lean into what they did to me and build power out of it. And not just me, but my wife, Laura, and my son, Matthew. Like, we built power out of it. We designed our life to build off of it. And, what ended up happening is, oddly enough, our social life got a lot better because everybody wanted to come by and see the guy with the ankle bracelet. We had dinner parties with just fabulous people who would come over and hang out. Tons of people came to the rallies, and I started to do interviews with tons of journalists, from my living room. I worked out every morning, every day. I had this kind of trick where a lot of people thought I was just bored all day, but I was actually working my ass off trying to figure out how to deal with this. But around 5, 6 o'clock every day, like the end of the workday, I would take a shower and change my clothes and act like we were going out, but we would actually just go to the kitchen and cook. So we sort of dealt with it in the best way we knew how. We decided, and we consciously sort of, my wife and I committed to not letting a trauma turn into a pathology in our home, to not obsess over this crap, to not talk about it constantly, to still try to be normal with our son, so he wouldn't have to think we were freaking out, even though there were nights, that were very, very difficult. And ultimately, they put me on trial. They put me on trial for contempt of court. Just so you know, the maximum sentence for a misdemeanor in this country is 6 months in prison. But there's some weird thing, even though the Constitution says everyone charged with the crime is entitled to a jury, there's some judge-made rule that if they agree to sentence you to 6 months or less, they can deny you a jury. So the judge said, you're not getting a jury, the maximum sentence will be 6 months. But they kept me in house arrest for 2 years and 2 months, 4 times the maximum sentence before I could get to trial. And do you know what the judge said when I said, you got to free me because I've already served my sentence 4 times over? She said, no, you haven't served your sentence. You're free. I'm like, what do you mean I'm free? She goes, well, you could be in jail. Okay, I sent you home. You're basically free with conditions. That was what she said. Okay. There's all these doctrinal, I'm talking about as a lawyer here, there's all these doctrinal tricks that courts use, and we see this constantly with the US Supreme Court right now, which is like basically a political arm of the MAGA movement, okay, to persecute people in this country and make it look like it's not persecution by hiding it in the esoterica of some technical legal provision, okay? And they take advantage of the fact that most people are not lawyers, and even many lawyers don't see this, okay? I experienced it because I'm a lawyer and I think I'm moderately smart, and I saw what they were doing from the beginning, okay? There was always some ersatz legal basis to do what they were doing to me. And if you didn't know the law, you could never understand it was persecution. And it gave them cover because people could say, well, it's Rule 42 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. By the way, that's a rule that allowed the judge, this is the crazy part. Sorry, I'm going to get to Palestine in a second. When he charged you with contempt of court, judges, by the way, in this country, because of separation of powers, can charge contempt of court. It's the only crime they can charge. Every other crime is charged by the executive branch, meaning the federal prosecutor or state prosecutor. But when a judge charges this one crime, the professional prosecutor has to actually do the case. A judge can't prosecute a case. They can charge this one crime. And when the judge sent his charge to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Manhattan, the Trump-appointed U.S. attorney refused to prosecute me. Okay, they looked at the case and like, we're not going near that shit, because he could see, I think he could see that it was baseless. The judge then used this Rule 42, which is this really esoteric rule, to appoint a private prosecutor who worked for a Chevron law firm to step into the shoes of the US government to prosecute me. So I was targeted with the only private corporate prosecution in the history of this country. I mean, even with all this structurally rigged persecution of climate activists that exist in this country, even the Trump-appointed US attorney wouldn't play along. That's how bad it was. So the judge did something that I believe is patently corrupt. So I got prosecuted by the lawyers I had defeated in court in Ecuador. They come up here and put me in jail and tried to essentially destroy my life. Now, eventually this all ended. I did go to prison for 6 weeks, Danbury Federal Prison, because after that bogus misdemeanor contempt trial, where again I was denied a jury, despite the fact I've been in house detention for that, then by then it was like 2 years and 4 months, the judge still sentenced me to the maximum prison sentence, 6 months. And at that point, I swear I thought they might kill me in prison. I mean, the craziest shit. Remember how Jeffrey Epstein didn't make it through prison? That happened 3 days after I was arrested. He was found dead in prison. And I started thinking to myself, fuck, like if I go to prison, like so much irregular stuff was happening, I was really scared for my life. Although I'd never said that to anybody, most especially my family. Never said that, but I was thinking that. So part of my strategy on house arrest was to just pray and pray and pray I would not go to prison, even if I had to have an ankle bracelet on, hoping something would change. Until I finally realized, I came to a point where I realized I had to go to prison, or this was never gonna end. So I decided to just take the medicine. I wasn't scared of prison, to be honest. I was scared of the irregularity of what might happen to me because of corrupt shit in prison. But I mean, if I could be just treated as a regular inmate, I was probably, felt I was able to handle, but I was scared going to prison. And so I went to prison. I drove myself to prison with my wife. This is the guy who was like a risk of flight to Ecuador. I drove myself to prison. Went to prison, got into prison, and immediately I felt like a weird vibe from the staff who didn't like me being in prison. They were especially nice to me. Interesting, I'm just telling you. They were not happy I was in prison because they saw what had happened to me. They looked me up in the computer, and I was the only person in a 900-man prison there for a misdemeanor. Everyone else that was there was a felony. So I Googled it, and they're like, this is bullshit. They started to like take care of me. And ultimately, they used this weird provision of the law that had been passed because of COVID that was supposed to let older inmates get out so they could serve their sentences at home. And I just turned 60, like literally 4 weeks before I went to prison, so I qualified, and they sent me home after 6 weeks. And I had to spend the other 4.5 months back with the ankle bracelet at home, but obviously much better than being inside. When that ended, we had a rally. I don't know, Katie, if you came to the rally on April 20th, that was so much, one of the highlights of my life, because like we had a celebratory rally where we closed off the block on my street and tons of people came and everyone spoke. I think you spoke. Did you speak? I think you did. Yeah, you spoke. And I felt super empowered by the whole thing. I felt really happy and proud of myself and my family that I got through it the way I did. And of course I transitioned. I kind of didn't want to keep being known as like the Chevron lawyer guy, you know, so I started to try to use my legal skill and political analytical skill and research skills to start posting about a bunch of shit. I was really heavily into state repression, like how the law is used to silence speech and to try to target activists. And I got, for example, I got heavily into the whole Cop City thing. By the way, I don't know if you saw, but like that ridiculous RICO case was dismissed a few days ago, you know? And I'll say this about RICO since I'm talking about it. I have like a bunch of notes here. It's probably mildly incoherent, but I just want to say that RICO, civil RICO is an intimidation tool. You need to understand that. It is designed to intimidate. It is not a law that you can really use against activists in terms of getting criminal convictions. It's not going to happen. I don't believe, despite all their threats, they're going to be able to pull that off. Okay? Like Olivia, I don't think, you could be charged, okay? But I don't think anything's going to actually happen. But of course, the process is the punishment. Okay, they want to start creating these cases. First of all, they talk about that they're going to do it, and that intimidates a certain quantum of the population. Okay, it means of every 100 people would go to your rally, maybe 90 will come now, or 80. Okay, for every person talking aggressively, maybe they'll knock it down 10 decibels. Okay, We cannot quantify the impact of these intimidation tools, but they are designed to lessen our ability to do this work. Okay? And we need to understand the psychology of intimidation. And it's the same thing they're doing with universities and law firms and immigrants, and the immigrant population, and all sorts of other populations, okay? And I think the challenge for those of us who do climate activism or political work or Palestinian solidarity work, am I okay on time? Okay. Is how do we deal with what's coming, or what is existing now and will get even worse? And, you know, my advice, for what it's worth, obviously we all need to be courageous. We cannot retreat. We cannot cower. I know of all the people in the world, you guys probably know this better than anybody. I'm probably just repeating what you already know, but I just want you to know from someone who's been through it, okay? When you lower the temperature, you become a juicier target. I'm just telling you, okay? They go after people who are scared. They knew ABC would capitulate on the Jimmy Kimmel issue, okay? They knew Bob Iger could not withstand that threat. Imagine. Bob Iger, who fought Ron DeSantis over the whole Disney issue, I don't know if you guys remember that in Florida, capitulated in 2 hours. He's the CEO of Disney, by the way, if you don't know. We have to be careful not to get in this anticipatory compliance crap where you like, oh my God, this could happen, so I can't do this. And we're seeing a lot of that in corporate America. We're seeing a lot of that in the legal profession. It cannot come from us, meaning the people. Cannot come from us. Solidarity, as you know, is absolutely critical to this work. Fucking stick together, hug each other, build teams of people, do collaborations. I think my vulnerability on the Ecuador case is I worked a lot alone, too much alone. We had a lot of people, but I was working out of my apartment and I didn't have any kind of institution behind me. And they calculated that I could not withstand what they were going to throw at me. And I was able to get through it because I was able to raise money and get support. But, you know, when you're alone and vulnerable, you're, again, a juicier target. And the other thing I'd say is do the work with a smile on your face. I think many of you do. These are obviously serious fucking issues. There's a lot of suffering. I mean, Palestine is, I don't even know how to get my arms around it, okay? But we have to do this work with friendship, collaboration, solidarity, and joy if possible. Being joyful in this day and age is an act of political defiance. It's okay to have fun. It's okay to connect. It's okay to be proud of your work and just do what you can do in your place. You know, that's how you got to look at it, because they want us to be miserable. And like, I'm not gonna fucking be miserable. Sorry. I'm just not gonna do it. And you know, we decided that when I was locked up. We're not gonna be miserable. They're not gonna steal our happiness. We're in a critical moment in the history of this world right now. I mean, we cannot deny it. The climate crisis, the democracy crisis, war. I mean, you talk about the Pentagon, that's just the scarcity of resources for people. Israel blatantly committing genocide and thumbing its nose at the world. You know, legal mechanisms to hold those who do this accountable are just weak as fuck, right? I mean, the ICJ has this case. When's the trial? When's that trial? Okay. So I want to give a little quote that I dug out. I never give quotes, but I think this is actually very relevant. Gramsci, the Italian philosopher, he spent many years in prison, by the way. This young man was imprisoned at age 35 in 1926 in Italy. And he died 11 years later after spending almost all of those 11 years in prison. And he wrote tons in prison. By the way, if you ever have to go to prison, I hope you don't like write. I wrote, by the way, a diary when I was there for only 6 weeks. It's 250 pages. It's sitting in my house. I really should publish it. Anyway. He said, the old world is dying. The new world is struggling to be born. Now is the time of monsters. So how I read that is, in the crisis of today exist the seeds of tomorrow. It's really up to us. You know, liberal democracy has completely collapsed in this country. I mean, we are in it. We are in an authoritarian country. We have a one-party system, guys. Congress is dead right now. The Supreme Court is hopeless. I'm a lawyer. I've been reading these decisions. They're political. They're not a court. They're a political arm of the MAGA movement right now. The media, the corporate media, is capitulating. Okay. It really, these are the checks in a corporatist liberal democracy that usually at least are able to check some of the more extreme behavior, and they are going away. And on top of that, and people say, well, we'll just vote him out. I can imagine a scenario where there's no real vote. Martial law, troops in the streets, taking polling machines, confiscating them. That's this country now. I hope it doesn't happen. I don't want to be doom and gloom. I think we have the power to, there's a lot of resistance too, right? I mean, there's tons of people are onto this. A lot of resistance. And Climate Week, as limited as it is, as one of the speakers pointed out, there's tons of people who hate this. But we have a lot of challenges, right? It's not like Europe. Like, we have hardly any labor unions with power. And the so-called opposition party has very little to work with because it's been so hollowed out by corporate money. There's no base to the Democratic Party rooted in action. It's been so corporatized. So we have to think of creative ways to build power, to build structures, to build organizations, to build movements, to build campaigns, to build unions, social service organizations, and many of you folks who I heard on the panel have organizations that are powerful. So obviously you're going to keep building them and keep connecting these different organizations into one movement. So I don't know if I've added any value to this day at all. I hope I have. I'm honored to be asked to speak. I'm in awe of a lot of the work you folks do. I'm in awe of Code Pink. Code Pink trained a young woman for years named Allie McCracken, who helped save my life. I just want to point that out. She now works at Amnesty International, and we connected when I was detained, and she launched this whole global campaign, through the whole Amnesty, urgent action bulletin stuff. And when I got to prison, I was getting hundreds of letters a day from around the world, which completely shut. One of the reasons the staff was nervous about me and wanted me to get the hell out of there. When I got home, again, still serving my sentence and detained, they tried to lock me up again. 6 weeks later, because I was in the basement of my building and someone spotted me walking by, and I don't know who they told, but they're like, oh, you were out of your apartment. And they sent me to a halfway house, where they locked me up into a halfway house in the Bronx. And I didn't know if they were going to put me back in prison. I don't know if I'd ever go home again. I don't know if I was going to live in this halfway house for the next several weeks. It was really not great. And I called Allie. They let you take your cell phone into the halfway house, thank God. I called Allie, and she, from her office, launched a campaign. Within 48 hours, they let me go home. against the Bureau of Prisons, which was incarcerating me. And she basically said, if you don't let him out, we're gonna have 1,000 fucking people tomorrow outside that halfway house. I don't know if that was true or not, but she said it and they let me out, okay? So I wanna just end by saluting, again, all the Code Pink leaders. Love the videos. You guys do the best videos. Just hang around DC waiting to find people and like giving them shit. They're inspirational, they're juicy, and they really, I think, lift the spirits of a lot of people. And that's one way to do activism in a really effective way. So thank you to everyone, to what you're doing. I appreciate you inviting me.
Can we get a huge round of applause for Steven and for all the other speakers, the absolutely incredible speakers I've learned so much from. Just want to shout out Steven and all the organizations that have spoken, the Palestinian Institute for Climate Strategy, Veterans for Peace, the Palestinian Youth Movement, the Youth Climate Finance Alliance, the Black Alliance for Peace, and everyone else who has endorsed, who you can see behind me and who I listed earlier. Also a huge shout out to the over 450 people that have tuned in across platforms online, just to give a bit of a sense for people here. And so I hope that these speakers have given you a renewed sense of clarity, of strategy, of education, and also of talking points when continuing to organize, to understand what we're up against. This requires such a notion that we have, to reject the notion that we have separate movements, or that it's the climate movement versus the anti-war movement, or the anti-imperialist movement, or the Palestinian liberation movement. We're here because that has been reiterated by every single one of these speakers, and because, as has been stated, we're up against increasingly repressive forces inside a country whose wealth has been built from stolen and extracted resources globally, from stolen land. And we need to continuously evaluate our movement and understand the ways to best pool our resources, our energy, and our fights. We need to understand what red lines exist, unite proudly and strategically against militarism and imperialism. And that's what is being built here, and what has happened because we've strategized and built these campaigns. And so whether it's about Maersk and logistics companies, whether it's building an infrastructure of research, action, and education, whether it's about financiers like Citibank and creating youth fronts, whether it's educational mobilizations against air shows, whether it's about creating a network to demilitarize and end the domestic and international militarism that's plagued our Earth, or whether it's about the legal battles that expose the belly of the beast to us all. I also just want to shout out all the other campaigns that have been built in recent years that are taking on weapons manufacturers nationally and locally, institutions and companies like Palantir or BlackRock that span movements. Here in Brooklyn, there's also been a lot of work around the Brooklyn Navy Yard and evicting Cry Precision and Easy Aerial. And so this is happening at every scale. And they all provide key lessons and infrastructure. And to build all of this, we need to continue to shine a light on the elephant in the room and plugging in, amplifying strategic joint targets like everything that you've learned about today. And so to continue to plug in with Code Pink's efforts, specifically around our War is Not Green campaign, we have bi-weekly working groups that anyone's welcome to join. We'll be breaking out for anyone who's able to stay in person here in a few moments. But for anyone online, especially who wants to continue plugging in, you can go to codepink.org/wing, like W-I-N-G, War is Not Green. You can look at our petitions and open letters that we're trying to build around our open letter, codepink.org/environmentalists unite, and codepink.org/elephant to learn more about this campaign. And as I said, you can please check out all of the incredible work that these organizations have brought to us and strategized with us on. And so thank you so much all for being here. So for anyone who is here in person, we're going to transition in a few moments to some breakout conversation, but I do want to give folks just a brief break, around 5 minutes, to mill around, check out some of the incredible material at the tables, some stickers. But can I just get a sense roughly of who is planning on sticking around for breakouts? Are you able to? About 30 minutes or so.
I'm gonna, with the hands up, I'm gonna 1, 2, 3, and you'll go in your group of the number you say.